session. My name is Anna. I'm here with Greater Than, and I am really glad to be able to welcome you today to Business Unusual with my colleague Francesca Pick and Charmaine. And this session is particular, I think, because it wasn't hosted or wasn't posted right at the beginning, at the start of the Network Festival. Yet it is a conversation that is much needed, we believe, in this space, because one, networks, impact networks, are a way of post-growth, way of doing business. And within Greater Than, I guess we could say that this was the reason why we set ourselves up the way that we have. And we're practicing, experiencing decentralizing our growth and profit in many ways. But it has really landed with us. What does it mean, that language around post-growth, over the last couple of years? And I'm really excited that Fran has decided to join, also with Charmaine, who I think the whole meeting of this is actually an example of that, where Greater Than in April, we hosted a extended gathering for practitioners as well. And Charmaine was one of the individuals who was there, and conversations in between the conversations sparked this conversation that we'll have today. So with that, I welcome you, enjoy, and over to you, Fran.
And as Anna was saying, Greater Than is a collective that really, from its beginnings, was holding this tension and question of what does it actually mean to be a business or organization in today's world, working on impact, working on systems change, and wanting to question the fundamental system that we're in. Like, how do you actually be a business in that kind of context? So I would say it's been really, really alive with us, and I'm really here to learn today, and so curious what everyone here has to share, what experiences you've had, and what practices we can exchange and bring together. Really bridging also both the sort of conceptual element of this and the really practical, which for me, this has really been a very practical experience, I would say, over the years, much less than a theoretical one. And yeah, I think with that, I want to briefly introduce my session co-hosts and speakers. So you already just heard from Charmaine, who I've met through her work with Bramble, actually, which is a consultancy that works in the space of regeneration at large and other things similar to Greater Than. But she has a lot of other hats and has been doing a lot of writing and thinking around regenerative economics and related topics. So I'm really excited to be co-hosting this with her. And then we have with us Melanie Reback, who is very accomplished and has a lot of deep knowledge on the topic of post-growth, of nonprofit entrepreneurship, and has, I think, from my understanding, a lot of very practical experience in actually growing businesses, but also has a really great understanding of this landscape overall and how it's evolved over the years. So yeah, I'm really excited about this conversation. And I think with that, if it's okay for you, Melanie, I would pass the mic to you to give us just a really brief introduction. So for those of us who maybe don't feel as familiar with it, what is post-growth in brief, and anything you want to say to also just introduce yourself in the space.
Great, wonderful. So thank you so much for inviting me, and also, yeah, thank you for having me. So post-growth, I think that in the context of both business as well as economics, we tend to assume that growth is always good, and that more growth is better. Of course, the obvious case of this being with macroeconomics, with GDP, gross domestic product, and how we always assume, of course, that the economy needs to be kind of up and to the right. Of course, the moment that the economy starts to flatten out, then we find ourselves in recessionary conditions, and that's when things start becoming grim for people. So, of course, this endless economic growth puts pressure on our societies, it puts pressure on our planet, and of course, I think the majority of us understand by now that this is not doable for the long term. So I think really the question that post-growth is attempting to ask is, how do we thrive without never-ending growth? So the question, I think, was really first posed by, well, in a kind of formal way by the economist Tim Jackson. He wrote a book that was called Prosperity Without Growth. He also wrote some follow-up books. Also, Post-Growth was another book that he wrote. He also just released another book about the care economy. So anyway, I would highly recommend anything that he writes. But I think he's basically the father of post-growth. That being said, of course, far earlier than Tim, there were already discussions about growth and, of course, the degree to which we could keep it up. Of course, prior to Tim Jackson, you also had the Club of Rome and the original Limits Without Growth report that they also wrote together with MIT. And they basically had created a simulation that was also just showing ecologically what some of the outcomes were of the different growth scenarios, particularly including the business as usual scenario, which is the one that, well, we still appear to be on. I think just recently we had I want to say, I think it was the 50th year anniversary also of this Limits to Growth report. And sadly, we're actually still on that business as usual trajectory. And it seems like a lot of the predictions of this model have been correct so far. So anyhow, with the concept of post-growth, of course, there's other aligned concepts. Degrowth is also something that you frequently encounter. Degrowth, I believe, is really asking questions of how do we thrive basically in conditions of economic decline. And also a lot of the degrowth experts are also asking questions about sufficiency and also asking questions. They tend to see degrowth as a kind of temporary state that is meant to get us to post-growth. And where post-growth is sort of the ideal, where we can be in this kind of sort of flat economy without the need for never-ending growth. And degrowth is supposed to be the short-term measure to get us there. That being said, degrowth has a bad rap these days, in part because when people hear the word degrowth, they automatically think recession, whereas degrowth, of course, is generally defined as being a kind of intentional economic decline as opposed to an unintentional, uncontrolled one. That being said, I mean, the nuance, I think, is still a little bit hard to iterate. The version of degrowth that I actually like a whole lot better is from a philosopher and author, Charles Eisenstein, and he wrote a very wonderful book called Sacred Economics. And in his book, he talks about innovation as being like, let's say that you have a startup founder and they go to an incubator. Generally, the advice that they'll give you is to, take something that is a non-monetized human relationship or something in the commons, basically wed yourself in the middle of this as a platform, monetize it, and then voila, there's your startup idea. And then, of course, we call this innovation. So with Charles Eisenstein, his idea of degrowth really is almost, the complete opposite of this, a kind of like anti-innovation, if you will. And what you're actually doing is you're taking your company and you're basically placing it into the monetized economy. And then you are using that revenue that you're redirecting to also rebuild the commons and to rebuild non-monetized human relationships. And that's basically decommoditization. And there's no reason why you can't use businesses for sustainable long-term decommoditization. That to me is basically what a a degrowth business would look like. It sounds like a contradiction of terms. I really don't think that it is. So, but that being said, politically speaking, anyway, the term degrowth is a bit burned. They just tend to think that it's like Extinction Rebellion type saying, let's burn everything down. And that's actually really not, in my opinion, what degrowth is. Yeah. The final thing that I'll mention is also the donut model from Kate Rayworth. And for those of you who are not already familiar with her wonderful book, Donut Economics, I would also very highly recommend it. And basically what she's doing is she is taking that illustration, that image of an economy, of GDP, of this thing being always up and to the right, and she's instead turning it into a kind of circular image, which basically is combining ecological limits on the outside with social, basically SDG inspired factors on the inside. And she's basically creating what she calls the safe and equitable space between these social and these environmental constraints. And this illustration also of the economy has really spoken to a lot of people. And I would really say that I think sort of post-growth, degrowth, and the donut all collectively, there's also, of course, a well-being economy and, a bunch of other, you can call it what you want, but I think it's all very similar and related visions. And this is what I think post-growth is to me.
Thank you so much, Melanie. I think that was a really great overview of so many of these like different streams that are coming together and intersecting, and yeah, a lot of them that I recognize from different past moments, especially in the WeShare community that I used to be involved in. So I think with this, it feels like a great moment to go a little bit into our first question, and also to connect a little bit with, for each of us here, like, why are we actually working on this topic? What is it that has drawn us to the topic of post-growth, and why are we doing work in this space at the moment? So I think maybe with that, I'll pass to you, Charmaine, to briefly answer that question for yourself, then Melanie, and then I, and then you'll go off into breakouts to answer that same question, or a version of that. And so just one last reminder to those of you who maybe came in later, that if you do want to join breakouts, please put an X in front of your name so that we can make sure to add you to breakouts in this next segment. So yeah, with that, Charmaine, why are you involved in this space?
Great, thanks, Fran, and lovely introduction, Melanie. So I actually came into this concept through, I guess, a degree of disillusionment with the decarbonization and net zero target setting work that I was doing with big corporates. There was a period of time when I was working on the COP process, which involved, rallying corporates to join the largest climate ambition alliance at the time with the UN Climate Champions team. And I was convening these major consumer sector coalitions and players by revenue to make pledges to stay within a 1.5 degree warming trajectory. A lot of that, of course, involved being a communicator of an advocate of the climate science, but also, to convert the unconverted, let's say, commercial stalwarts and CFOs, I needed to make a business case for this as well. So I, at the time, dutifully peddled no shortage of case studies and convincing businesses that going green is good for business, and that it's been simultaneously possible for many companies and even countries to decouple their emissions from growth, whether that it's defined as shareholder value or GDP as a macro indicator. But around this time, I also began to learn that while this is true, it's also not the complete truth. And that is when I started reading more about the debate surrounding decoupling, realizing that many economists argue that it's not actually possible for total or universal decoupling to happen. That's the idea that actually takes into account the consumption of any natural resources or wider environmental impacts beyond carbon, or for that matter, for world decoupling to happen either, because of something called a carbon loophole, which is where rich countries effectively offshore their emissions to other global south countries typically. And so since then, I did my homework and I started, like Melanie, reading a lot more around the wider literature around degrowth. Jason Hickel's Less is More, Adrian Buller's The Valley of a Whale, and completed John Fullerton's Regenerative Economics course, which I would also really recommend. And they're all part of a great lineage of thinkers who have all sought to challenge this idea that exponential growth is fundamentally flawed and unnatural, and worse still, that can be made worse by green capitalism because of the financialization of capital itself being the real culprit. So I started, while I still worked with corporate, starting to Trojan horse these ideas into my portfolio of work with other big businesses. And some of this include, for example, a lecture series I did for the UN Global Compact last year on net zero transformation. And, that was a great experience for me because I felt like while I have been immersing myself in these ideas, I realized how new this topic was for still so many people and how much interest it generated from attendees. And so it's still far from mainstream, and there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to push this conversation into other contexts. Which kind of led me to starting to document these ideas through a platform I host called Regenomics, in the hope that it will be a partner for my own learning, but also create space for this type of dialogue and conversation and perhaps other explorers on the journey to post-growth and regenerative economics. So I'll pause there. Yeah, I'd love to hear from the other speakers as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Melanie, and then I'll tag on after that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I got into nonprofit social enterprise about 11 years ago and starting my cybersecurity company, Radically Open Security. I did it primarily because I was a bit annoyed at the market leaders and how they were behaving, and I really wanted to try creating a social enterprise, but I realized there was so much greenwashing that I needed to do something more fundamental to try and get the greenwashing out of the company for the company to be meaningfully social. And I think, in the 11 years, since then, of course, has unfolded my journey of really understanding what that means and how to be able to do it. So I realized, I think quite early on, that financial extraction or usury out of businesses was really the problem. Because if you could use governance structures where you would basically lock the value of a company inside the company, then you would be fundamentally realigning the incentive structures of that business on a systems level. And that was really what I was after. So I gave away my company 10.5 years ago for €1 to a foundation. Just to ensure basically that the company would never have an exit, would never be sold. Nowadays, I'm also placing some extra golden shares with the Purpose Foundation and things like that, just to complete the process of locking everything down. Because mind you, like 11 years ago, the Purpose Foundation didn't even exist, and Steward ownership was barely known. So it sort of took a while, on constant iteration to sort of make things what it needs to be. But, after 4 or 5 years, I think, of running my company this way, we also use this weird church business model called a fiscal fundraising institution, which forces us to donate 90% of our profits to charity. That's also highly unusual. So, and we've donated over €1 million to the Dutch NLNet Foundation, which funds open source projects, digital rights initiatives, and anything for an open internet. So, this has all been really good developments. After about 4 or 5 years, folks also started coming up to me asking for help and business advice, basically just starting similar businesses, but in other areas. And that's when I also created my incubator that's called Nonprofit Ventures. And we've incubated 5 cohorts of startup founders in the context of post-growth, degrowth, and the donut, with an emphasis on steward ownership as a governance structure. We've incubated almost 70 startups since then. Also, I took the incubator materials, generalized them slightly, and created a class called Post-Growth Entrepreneurship. That is now, I finished teaching the 3rd year at the University of Amsterdam Business School. It's part of the Economics and Sustainability minor, and we've been teaching it annually to 120 third-year bachelor students. We actually this year had a waiting list also of another 150 students, so we're actually looking to see if we can double the size of the class for next year. It's a bit ridiculous. So we've also branched out to other business schools. So I also have to create a 2-course degrowth entrepreneurship module for the degrowth masters at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And also we just finished teaching that for the 2nd time this year online to the Degrowth Masters students as well. Beyond that, I've been involved with political lobby. I've been involved with the Beyond Growth movement at a European level. Nonprofit Ventures was sort of one of the co-organizers of that event, kind of a bit on the periphery. And also, I have been directly involved in launching this Dutch Steward Ownership Legal Forum initiative in the Netherlands. So I'm not done yet. I actually have some new initiatives that I'm busy working on right now. I'm not going to go into them at the moment because I could take up all the time, and I'm not going to do that. But the point is, there's really a lot of work that we have to do with this stuff. It's also very practical work that we can do. And I'm an entrepreneur, but guess what? All of us can be. So, and I hope that that's also a little bit what you all can take out of this gathering, that, whether you're already involved with post-growth or whether you want to get involved with post-growth, I mean, there's just so much outstanding work that needs to be done, and all of us can do it.
Yeah, that's really very encouraging to hear, Melanie. And yeah, I'm really glad to hear that in business schools there's actually interest for this and that that's being taught, because I myself went to business school not that long ago, but I just remember feeling like all of the economics classes were just, really outdated. No one ever heard of Eleanor Ostrom's principles, and all you learn about is the tragedy of the commons, which is really too bad. So yeah, I guess to briefly answer the question for myself as well, how do I get into this work? I would say from an extremely practice-based perspective, because actually it was when I came out of business school, which was actually quite an alternative school that's very focused on systems thinking, called Zeppelin University in southern Germany. I got involved in the WeShare community that some of you have maybe heard of. It's OUI share, like we in French. And that was really my induction in a way into this space, even though I didn't know that that's what was happening. Because in a way, one of the things in the WeShare community that was very focused on the sharing economy at the time, but it was basically a big experiment of how to just organize radically differently with people that were extremely young, had a lot of energy, had social safety nets, such as the one in France, that allowed them to experiment at an early stage in their career and sort of quit jobs and just go for it. But yeah, I guess one of the, looking back, one of the tensions that was there really early on that has really, really grabbed me was this tension between nonprofit and for-profit. And feeling like at the time there was different members that were projecting different things into the same community, seeing it as a possibility to make big business, and others seeing it as something like a cause they were volunteering for, and feeling like we weren't really able to navigate the complexity of that, while also that leading to a huge amount of diversity and like an explosion of lots of amazing initiatives. But yeah, I think it's really that was one of the questions that I took forward from being in that community for so many years and trying to make a livelihood in it, and which was sort of one of the sparks then that led to Greater Than Collective being formed, which is basically an experiment in how to be a post-growth business that is evolving every day and facing all kinds of challenges and questions as we do that. But yeah, for me, the living lab element of Greater Than has always been really key. And so yeah, one of the things that I was really excited to be able to implement is stewardship ownership that Melanie mentioned. So that's definitely, I guess, has felt like one of the most tangible elements of it. But I think for me, a thing that really also, I think, keeps me in this space is actually what connects a lot with, I think, Charles Eisenstein's work around what are the stories, the narratives, the social patterns of humans around how we actually move more into this abundance mindset, the connectedness, realizing that we're not on our own, we're not separate, and how does that then actually reflect in terms of yeah, just creating value for others and business being the container for that. So yeah, I think I feel like we've dove in deeply, and probably maybe for people that are new to this, it's like, oh my God, what are all these different terms and all these concepts? So you're going to get a bit of time to land and maybe connect with others and reflect on some of the things that just came up. So I think I'm gonna send us into our first breakout,
The question that we'd like to sit with in this round is really starting to get into the realities and maybe some of the kind of green shoots and seeds of hope we're seeing in the system. So the question, which I'll also paste in the chat, is around in the current geopolitical climate, what are some of the challenges for the post-growth movement and what's giving us hope? And perhaps any practical examples we're beginning to notice that we'd like to kind of weave into our contexts as well. So this time round, perhaps I'll hand over to Francesca first, and then Melanie, and then I'll kind of round us off. So over to you.
Alrighty. Yeah, feels like a tough question in this moment. I guess to me it seems like there's a key thing that we're seeing happening right now, which I see as a big challenge for what we're talking about here, which is that everywhere around me, at least, I'm seeing people feeling very much in a moment of contraction, of fear, of like this sense of scarcity, like there's less around, like the economy is only I was going to say shrinking. The economies are growing less than expected, right? Which is obviously also all part of this issue. But yeah, I guess just the pressure that people are feeling in their day-to-day on like what they need to live, their costs, and how that's also then reflecting itself in businesses. To me, that like putting people into that feeling of activation and fear is really the opposite of where we need them to be to embrace what we're talking about here in terms of post-growth, because that's obviously, as I was saying earlier, about connectedness, which we're seeing here with this beautiful cat in real life being enacted. Yeah, and feeling that abundance and openness to doing things differently, and also actually like having this feeling of like enoughness and not needing to chase after more material things to be able to yeah, I guess create a feeling of safety, right? Like using material things to create a feeling of safety. So that might sound quite high level, not very, very practical. So maybe some of you can help me ground that. But yeah, I think to me that's something that I'm encountering now in a lot of different types of interactions when it comes to organizations we might do work with, or people that want to get involved, that fear suddenly is much stronger than I've noticed it to be in the last 10 years. And there's less that feeling of like anything is possible and that sort of expansiveness. So that's sort of from the pessimistic view on the challenges. Maybe I'll leave it at that for now. Curious what you all think. Melanie, what about you?
I'm sorry. I have a cat invasion here, but she's too cute to get rid of. So anyhow, so my opinion about this, I agree with you with what you're saying about the feeling of desperation. But I think it's actually deeper than that, because I don't think it's just a feeling. It's also the fact that there are a lot of genuine political obstacles at the moment. So basically, in some of the lobby work that I've done at a European level, also in the Netherlands, I really notice that anything these days that gets perceived as being progressive left or woke kind of gets systematically shut down. So actually one of my recent hobbies has been actually trying to take some of the post-growth messaging and actually trying to translate it into Christian right. Just because I'm tending these days to not really use the term post-growth entrepreneurship quite so much. Instead, I'm using the term non-extractive organizations, just because the term post-growth has already been quite politicized, and basically everything that's called post-growth these days is kind of shot down. So, but I've actually been starting some new projects together with some like-minded Christian groups. There's a group called the Economy of Francesco, who I just 3 weeks ago organized a startup incubator with. which was basically very similar to a post-growth entrepreneurship incubator as I've been organizing them. But it was actually based on Catholic social teaching, which if you're not familiar with that, there's actually a lot of really like-minded stuff that's in there. So that was actually a really cool event. We'll probably be organizing, I think, a second follow-up for later in Poland, because the first one was actually in Croatia on an island at a monastery. It was really cool. And I'm actually now speaking with some Protestants from Business Mission also about seeing if we can, in the Netherlands, perhaps also create a kind of Protestant version of the same incubator. But then we were talking maybe about using this so-called Stadsklooster, the city cloister in Dordrecht, which is just outside of Rotterdam, to basically see if we can create a similar event there. And I'm really having a lot of pleasure and joy with this, just because, it's really wonderful seeing sort of an opposite political side, an opposite ideological side of people who also still very deeply care about being social. And and that's one of the things I think also that's kind of given me hope. I mean, I think the political polarization is killing us, but I think actually being able to surround ourselves with people that are different from us and get out of our filter bubbles, it's a little hard, I think, for us on the left sometimes to do. But I think actually if you do, you'll find treasures, because, it's very interesting trying to not just translate our ideas into different cultures, but also to see what you can absorb from those other cultures. And you might be surprised by what you find, and also find that even if people disagree with you on some issues, that there's some cultural bits that you can also absorb that will very much complement the ways that you already saw things.
Lovely, Melanie. I really love that example because, and actually, it sort of reminded me of some of the more at a macro level, some kind of, many people in the West don't know this, but countries like Bhutan have actually adopted gross national happiness into their national policy decades ago now. And Thailand's also adopted a kind of sufficiency economy philosophy that's actually grounded on Buddhist principles of moderation and self-immunity. So, these ideas have actually, they're not new. They're actually have deep roots in ancient traditions and non-Western thought forms. And that also is what is inspiring me, that actually this moment of reckoning is perhaps forcing us to see that this kind of Western-centric, anthropocentric worldview is not serving us well, and we need to kind of think beyond these measures that have crippled us and our economies to date. But no, but even in the West, it's, I read recently that over 80% of European citizens actually support more beyond GDP measures. And it seems that this kind of growing tide that's also bottom up is hopefully going to start creating a bit of a kind of seismic shift to these principles and ideas becoming more mainstream, and hopefully even as they're not necessarily being adopted right now, the kind of pendulum will shift ever so slowly towards the other direction again. So yeah, some kind of resonant thoughts there. But curious, Francesca, if there were also, you kind of led us on the challenges, but if there were more kind of seeds of hope as well from your contexts that you're seeing.
Yeah, I guess one thing I wanted to share that I think is quite interesting that I've been seeing pop up in a lot of places is actually work around intentionally closing things, and also setting sort of life cycles or timelines for the existence of organizations or certain initiatives. And I think we've been seeing this especially in the philanthropy space. Maybe a bit more in the NGO sector. But it feels like that there is this idea that's starting to get a bit more integrated, that to me is really at the heart of the idea of regeneration, is that there's these cycles, and that includes like seeding and birthing and maturing and then dying and having that creative destruction. And that, right, the whole notion of growth is that we just keep going more and more into the maturation, and that just doesn't work, right? So like things need to get let go, they need to die, they need to go through that eco cycle, which is also like a really super practical tool that we use all the time in Greater Than and with organizations we work with. So it's the infinity loop basically of the different cycles. But yeah, I think on a very practical level, it's been interesting to see over the years that there's been like a couple, for instance, a foundation in the UK called Langley Chase that basically decided like, okay, actually, you know, us continuing to exist as an organization, like even though we're a philanthropist, we're upholding the system that we're trying to change, and us participating in this way isn't actually in service. So they've set a deadline basically that they're going to be shutting, and they're just giving away all of the money. And obviously that's like completely contradictory to how most foundations are set up, where that seems like a crazy idea to give away your endowment. And the other thing that's interesting is that actually WeShare that I mentioned earlier, I think because of some of these insights of I guess needing to let go of things and actually create space for the new to grow, the WeShare community decided a few years ago to do a conscious closing process. That actually it took a couple years. It was hard because it also required that maybe like residual tensions or challenges in the community needed to get addressed enough to actually agree that we're going to do the closing process. But basically that was concluded and really, really beautifully documented, so that now when you go to the WeShare website, it still exists and you can actually see all of the different things that came out of it and yeah, what that has led to. And I've just really noticed that people seem to have a lot of resonance with this idea, and it feels really great. This, oh, let's actually close things and make space for new things to emerge, even if that letting go can be painful. So yeah, that's something that gives me hope, even though it's about dying. But I think that's something that's important to bring more into these spaces.
Thank you, Francesca. And Melanie, I know your cat's kind of the spot has got the spotlight right now, but also curious to hear if, yeah, just from your field of practice, any kind of interesting, perhaps alternative business models or interesting case studies, perhaps that can also kind of ground us in the context of how we can not just think about this theoretically, but kind of make it real in our environments.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, I think that the steward ownership movement right now is, I think, the most practical offshoot that's sort of coming, I think, a little bit closest to the whole post-growth vision. That being said, I think there's a couple different forms of steward ownership. One with strong asset locks and another one lacking strong asset locks. And the truth is that you really need constructions like golden shares to be able to prevent sale of the company. You know, foundation ownership by itself is not enough. If you want evidence of that, look at OpenAI or IKEA. I mean, you know, they're foundation-owned companies, but they're not social. What you actually really need is foundation ownership with golden shares. You know, also because what you're trying to prevent is basically dividend out of the company, mergers and acquisitions, changing the mission and purpose in your statutes. We also need to think about other ways that cash can leak out of the company, because really the challenge that we're trying to address is just how do we actually make sure there's 100% reinvestment in these kinds of companies. In doing this, you know, there's already a couple thousand steward-owned companies globally, and, you know, but we need more supporting infrastructure for this. Of course, legal forms is just one potential way of doing it and making it easier. But even without that, we need to create incubators that can support and cultivate steward-owned companies. We also need to think about the issues of golden shares. Basically, how do we issue them? Who holds them? How can we do it with multiple golden shares rather than with one golden share, just to ensure that we have sort of defense in depth, you know, with locking our assets. You know, that's all infrastructure that really still needs to be built, you know, and not to mention the whole finance angle, you know, about sort of steward-owned finance. What does that look like? Not just having investors who want to invest in steward-owned companies, but how do you reform the actual financial companies themselves to ensure that they themselves are non-extractive? So can you start creating financially non-extractive investment funds that also make use of steward ownership and reforming the fee structures? You know, I mean, there's a few role models out there, but I can only count them on one hand, and we need to start more, you know, and that's the other thing, like requiring a lot of GP RFPs, fund managers that are brave, who want to start these things. And then on top of it, legitimizing it with limited partners, things like, not just small investors, but also institutional investors like pension funds and banks and insurance companies. We need to get people to understand that it is actually good business and good investment, to try and create these kinds of responsible companies. And but it requires a different mindset that isn't there yet, and I think it requires spreading narratives in a way that the narratives just aren't living yet, and which is odd because you would think in sustainable finance that precisely this kind of thing would live amongst those who choose for it. And it's not ill will; it's just that a lot of them just simply don't know. So I think that there's really a huge opportunity right now for us to spread these ideas, into education, at conferences, into the finance sector, into different places, into the entrepreneurial ecosystem, into government. There's so much work that can be done. But I see people that are starting to pick up this work. And I mean, that is what is going to move us forward. And, all of that gives me hope as well.
Yeah, beautifully put, Melanie. And echo what you were saying about the kind of how sustainable finance itself can be maybe, with all the best intentions of natural capital accounting and all of the kind of more holistic measures of accounting for the value of things, that can actually often backfire into something that actually creates more of a kind of skewed perspective of what the system needs, and creates skewed incentives for regeneration. So I think I found, even at the community scale, that's been something that's giving me hope, that there are many alternative communities that are practicing social permaculture and commons-based ways of sharing space and being in right relationship with nature, that I had the opportunity to visit last year. And while post-growth feels like a system scale problem, the word eco in economics and ecology comes from the same root word oikos, right, which means household, and that ultimately this comes down to the root of this, comes down to the way we steward our own homes and communities towards care, slowness, equal participation, and kind of values around distributive resource management. So
Vida.
Yeah, thank you. Just a resonant question that I kind of got taken away with in the chat, but I saw it in the chat, is that how do you balance these ideas of there are still people in so much inequality, there are still indigenous people who have not come into the economic system fully, are not able to live like decent, right lives and like right livelihood. My context in South Africa, I have like 70% youth unemployment around me. What is the balance between, we're speaking about post-growth and degrowth? It feels to me always like this conversation is centered in the developed world. And how do we balance like the whole world vision? Because we all need to, be a part of this. And of course, I'm under no illusion that GDP is going to solve it, because most conventional businesses don't actually solve the inequality issue. But I just felt that question very present in the chat today.
Maybe I can address that one. So South Africa is a country of stunning inequality. It's hard to think of other countries that have more inequality. The problem is, from what I've seen, is that oftentimes when development happens in the global South, it is usually fueled by capital from Westerners, basically from people from the global North. I have a friend who lives in Nairobi in Kenya, and she was actually telling me that some of the venture capital that comes into the country, of course, with that venture capital comes, Northern bias. And some of the VCs I've heard actually refuse anyway to fund startups that don't have at least one white co-founder, which is pretty horrific. So I think the problems then really are introduced with capital, also because a lot of the value that is actually created then within that country winds up getting extracted out of the country into the pockets of foreign investors. Perhaps in South Africa that happens within the country, but maybe it's just that some of the wealth, if there is much of it, that's being created by the black communities, maybe it's just going into the pockets of some of the white people around. I don't know that much about South Africa, so I can't speak to the dynamics. But what I do think is important, though, is enabling people to create businesses that are free of that kind of extractive finance. In other words, to help people with bootstrapping their own companies. In other words, companies created by the communities, for the communities, with a value proposition that the community actually cares about, because it's also very easy for us to come in with white savior complexes. And want to, often through nonprofits, drop things on communities that have no interest in them. And that's also a total waste of time and money and energy. So that's, I think, part of the reason why I think that stuff like post-growth entrepreneurship, steward ownership, also just in general, startup incubation, and also just ensuring that the goal is not creating more unicorns. Because if you consider some of the African unicorns, like I think it was M-Pesa, also in Kenya, I mean, it got acquired at a certain point. I forget exactly by which country, but it was something in the global north. And, thus, ensuring this is actually also an issue of global sovereignty, and just setting things up in such a way that we can ensure that those companies that are born, that are raised, that are cultivated, it was just sweat and blood and toil, of the local people, that continues serving that local community in the long run. And I think this is something that's extremely well suited also to the global south.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Vida, for bringing that really important question, and also Melanie for getting a sense of some of the things that we should be thinking about in that. And I also think this is not a question that we can answer easily, and that we need to take forward. I think probably a lot of the things that you all talked about in your breakouts are juicy questions that you need to chew on for a long time and bring into different spaces.
The kind of influx of messages. I'm just so thrilled to, I think this type of a community is what gives me hope in just as many ways as the examples we've shared. It's a kind of beautiful embodiment of micro-solidarity principles, and exactly the kind of thing we should be doing to counter the dominant narratives that exist. So just a huge thank you for giving your time and energy for the session.
Melanie, any final thoughts to give?
Absolutely. So if you're interested in my materials, I would anyway recommend that you have a look at the post-growth entrepreneurship class videos that I released for free with an open source license on YouTube. You can find them pinned to the top of my LinkedIn profile. And for the rest, if anyone has any additional questions, needs any help with anything, just, wants to have a conversation because I think there's something you can do or help, just, again, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'm always happy just to chat. If there's anything I can do to help, if you have any ideas, just feel free to reach out.
Great. Yeah, I think from my side, one thing that I'm really still sitting with that you mentioned, Melanie, that there's so much infrastructure that's needed for this work, for post-growth entrepreneurship to thrive, and that, so much of it still needs to be built, it needs to be developed, so that means a lot needs to be done. But it also, at least from my experience, it means that there's so much pressure on the people trying to do things differently to figure it all out. And I think that we're making great headway in more of these things being in place, and stewardship ownership is a great example of that. But I guess something that I'm really passionate about, that I guess I just wanted to share with others here that are trying to do the same, is that it's really important to find others to get support with all these different questions that come up as you're on your journey of post-growth entrepreneurship, if that's what you're doing. And that sometimes it seems like you need to figure out everything on your own, and actually there is more that already can be built on, and that I think we really need to work together more, so that there's not so much of that pressure on individual projects and initiatives to figure it all out from scratch, but sort of to make a very mini path slightly better trodden and sort of show all the different directions. So that's something also in Greater Than, like we're really passionate about supporting people with doing, so they feel less alone with all of this. And always really happy to talk about that.
Yeah. Another thing, by the way, is some people have been taking those PGE class videos and they've started organizing study circles. And they basically have just been getting together with some people in their community who they think would also enjoy and or benefit from this material. And they're basically just getting together and doing, it could be like 1 or 2 videos a week, and then having guided discussions. We're actually right now also releasing a playbook for those who want to organize study circles. So if anybody's interested in playing with this idea, I would say feel free to reach out to me, and I'm also happy to give you a copy of this playbook.
Thank you so much, Melanie. And now I'm just going to pass to Anna to sort of tie a bow on this and tell us also like how to continue the conversation both in the festival and also in other ways.
Thank you. Thank you to all 3 of you. Thank you for each and every one of you. It's been such a, I would say, participatory, engaged conversation. And I love that. I love that also about the Network Festival. So I just want to speak briefly about how to continue your journey. Well, one, you know that this session is made thanks to the contributions that are made to the Networks Festival donation. We are still contributing, still continuing, making this session and many more sessions available as we continue over the next couple of weeks. So if you haven't had a chance yet, if you love this session, please make your contributions. This goes to all of the organizers and the hosts of the sessions. And connect with the host. Melanie has mentioned it multiple times, same with Charmaine and Francesca. Find them on LinkedIn and connect with them, have a one-to-one conversation. How to continue this? There's a couple of more sessions that are coming up within the Network Festival that touch upon the topics. So one is the Networks, Money, and Collective Power coming up on the 16th of June. That is going to be hosted also by our colleagues from Greater Than. And questioning how we pay on June 19th. This is a real live experimentation that we've been having within Greater Than on how one can orient towards needs rather than salary and different ways of paying. And last and not least, but beyond the festival, I invite you to connect with us through Greater Than. We will have a community conversation starting September around these type of topics. So the best way to stay tuned with that is to join the Weekender, which is our weekly newsletter. Check out our handbook, videos, manifesto, and also a growing externally project called Greater Than Lab, which is all of our work. It's going to have all of the work that we do internally and externally with our clients as we experiment and showcasing that in a collective lab. So check out those links. Thank you, Fran, for adding them in the chat. They will also come to you over the email that will include the recording.